I knew moving into a neighborhood with a homeowners association was a gamble, but I never thought it would lead to handcuffs on my lawn. My name's Scott Vance, and up until last week, I was just the guy who liked working on classic cars in his garage and minding his own business. That was until Wendy Lancaster, president of the HOA and self-proclaimed neighborhood ambassador, decided I was her personal enemy. It started because I parked my 1967 Mustang in my driveway for a few days while clearing out the garage. Apparently, that was a violation of HOA guidelines, according to Wendy. She showed up at my door one afternoon, clipboard in hand, tapping her 2-inch red nails against it like she was filing a police report. "You can't leave junk cars in plain sight, Scott," she said, wrinkling her nose like she smelled something rotten. "It devalues the neighborhood." "It's not junk," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "It's a classic and it's registered. Try again." That didn't sit right with her. Wendy stormed off, muttering about standards and fines. I figured it would blow over like most of her tantrums. But Wendy wasn't the type to let things go. No, she had to escalate. 2 mornings later, I woke up to a weird sound like running water coming from the basement. My gut twisted. I flew down the stairs and found my entire basement floor underwater. There was a garden hose jammed through the tiny basement window, blasting water like a fire hydrant. I yanked the hose out, heart pounding, and sprinted outside. That's when I caught her, Wendy herself, standing by my side yard, hose in hand, looking way too pleased with herself. "You brought this on yourself, Scott," she shouted, not even trying to hide it. "Maybe next time you'll listen to authority." I couldn't believe it. She actually thought she was justified. My fists clenched, but I kept my cool. I pulled out my phone, took pictures of the hose, the water damage, and most importantly, Wendy standing there like she was posing for a mugshot. "You just committed vandalism, Wendy," I said calmly. "Hope you enjoy explaining that to the cops." Her smug expression faltered for the first time, but then she doubled down, crossing her arms and sneering. "You're bluffing. No cop's gonna arrest me. I'm the HOA president." "Yeah," I said, "and now you're also a criminal." I dialed the police right then and there, while Wendy stood frozen, realizing she might have just made the worst mistake of her life. The police cruiser rolled up within minutes, its lights flashing silently against the early afternoon sun. Wendy's posture stiffened like she was trying to summon some invisible authority, but her eyes darted around, betraying the panic creeping in. I made sure to stay on my driveway, arms crossed, while she lingered awkwardly near the side of my house, still clutching the end of the hose like it was her last lifeline. 2 officers stepped out, an older man with a lined face that had clearly seen too much nonsense in his career, and a younger woman who already had her notepad out. "Afternoon, sir," the older officer said, glancing at me before turning his gaze to Wendy. "We got a call about property damage." I nodded and gestured toward the soaked basement window and the hose still dripping onto the grass. Caught her red-handed. "Hose through the window, basement's flooded." The younger officer scribbled something down without looking up. Wendy's mouth twitched like she couldn't decide whether to bolt or bark orders. "This is a misunderstanding," she blurted out, stepping forward. "I'm the HOA president, and he's violating community standards by keeping junk vehicles outside." I was simply enforcing. The officer raised a hand to stop her. "Ma'am, does your HOA covenant allow you to enter private property without permission or cause property damage?" Her face flushed a deep crimson. Well, no, but good." "Because that would be illegal," the officer said, voice flat. "And that's exactly what you're being accused of." Wendy took a step back, her hands trembling slightly. "You don't understand. He's been flaunting the rules for weeks. He's undermining the whole neighborhood." The younger officer finally looked up. "Flooding someone's basement isn't how you handle violations. That's vandalism. Possibly criminal mischief, depending on the extent of the damage." I pulled up the photos I had taken and handed my phone to the older officer. He swiped through them, his brow furrowing deeper with each image. "Clear evidence," he muttered. And you witnessed her with the hose in hand. Caught her in the act, I said. She even admitted it. Wendy's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I never admitted anything. The younger officer's gaze sharpened. You just did. Without another word, the older officer moved behind Wendy and reached for his cuffs. The metallic click echoed louder than it had any right to. Wendy jolted as the cuffs snapped around her wrists. You can't do this, she shrieked. I'm the authority here. I demand you call the HOA board. You can demand all you want, the officer said, guiding her toward the cruiser. Right now, you're under arrest for vandalism and trespassing. Neighbors had started to gather by then, peeking through windows and lingering on sidewalks. I caught sight of Mr. Ramirez from across the street shaking his head and whispering something to his wife. As the cruiser pulled away with Wendy fuming in the back seat, the younger officer handed me a card. File a full report with the city, she said. And you'll want to get a damage assessment for insurance and court. I tucked the card into my pocket, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and disbelief. The next few days were a whirlwind. I hired a water damage restoration company, and the bill wasn't pretty. Thousands of dollars in damages soaked drywall, ruined flooring, mold risk. But the silver lining came when I found out my insurance company had a legal team eager to help sue for restitution. Meanwhile, the HOA board, now missing their iron-fisted president, called an emergency meeting. I had no intention of missing that. The meeting was held in the drab community center. Beige walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and folding chairs arranged in stiff rows. About 30 homeowners showed up, the largest turnout I'd seen since moving in. Janice, the treasurer, stood at the front, clearing her throat nervously. As many of you know, Wendy Lancaster has been temporarily removed pending legal proceedings. We're here to discuss next steps. Someone from the back shouted, "Why wasn't she removed sooner?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. I caught the eye of Mr. Ramirez, who gave me a small nod. Janice wrung her hands. We didn't have documented evidence before. Legally, she was within her rights up until now. I stood up, feeling every eye shift toward me. I have more evidence, I said. Wendy's been abusing her position for months. Selective enforcement, harassment, intimidation tactics. And several fines she issued have no basis in the bylaws. Janice blinked. You have proof? I held up a thick folder. I had spent the past 2 days compiling emails, HOA letters, and notes from neighbors who had quietly shared their experiences once they heard what happened. Turns out Wendy had been threatening to foreclose on homes over minor landscaping issues, issuing fabricated citations, and pocketing administrative fees that were never recorded in the HOA's financials. Gasps filled the room as I passed the folder to Janice. She flipped through it, her face growing paler by the second. This is serious, she said, voice trembling. If even half of this is true, we're talking fraud. It's all true, I said, and there's more. I found out that Wendy's been altering meeting minutes to cover up board votes that never actually happened. Mr. Ramirez stood up. I move that we initiate a full independent audit of the HOA's finances and operations immediately. The room erupted in a chorus of seconding shouts. Janice raised her hands. All in favor, nearly every hand shot up, the motion passed unanimously. Wendy's stranglehold over the neighborhood had officially snapped. Outside the center, a few neighbors gathered around me. You really saved us, Scott, said Mrs. Patel, clutching her purse tightly. We were all so scared of her. She counted on that, I said, but we're not powerless, not if we stick together. Over the next week, the audit began. An independent firm combed through years of financial records. Turns out Wendy had siphoned off tens of thousands of dollars for consulting fees to a fake company she set up under her maiden name. She'd also been approving vendor contracts without board votes, all while dodging required financial disclosures. The district attorney's office got involved after the audit report landed on their desk. New charges were filed: embezzlement, fraud, and tampering with public records. Wendy's bail was revoked, and she was hauled back to jail pending trial. Meanwhile, the HOA board scheduled new elections. For the first time, regular homeowners were encouraged to run. No secret handpicking by a clique of insiders. Mr. Ramirez ran for president, and with overwhelming support, he won. His first act: dismantling the ridiculous car rules and setting up a system where residents could actually vote on new policies. The day they tore down the old HOA office sign from the clubhouse and replaced it with community center, we threw a block party. Grills fired up, kids raced around the cul-de-sac, and laughter filled the air. Someone even set up a table with a big glass jar labeled Wendy's Retirement Fund filled with Monopoly money. I stood back, sipping a lemonade as the sun dipped behind the trees. My Mustang gleamed in the driveway, freshly polished, with a hand-painted sign propped against it that said Neighborhood Treasure. No more clipboard tyrants, no more threats, just a neighborhood finally free. 2 weeks after the block party, the full extent of Wendy's misdeeds came into sharp focus. The independent audit team discovered something far worse than anyone had anticipated. Wendy hadn't just skimmed HOA funds for herself. She had also forged liens against several homeowners, claiming they owed massive fines to justify legal action, and in some cases, quietly acquiring properties at foreclosure sales through a shell company she secretly operated. The news spread like wildfire. Whispers turned into furious discussions at the mailbox clusters and on porches. People weren't just angry anymore. They were terrified at how close they had come to losing their homes over fabricated debts. One evening, while I was replacing the weather stripping on my garage door, a black SUV pulled up in front of my house. 2 men in suits stepped out, flashing badges before they even reached the walkway. "Mr. Vance?" the taller one asked. "That's me. Detective Harris, White Collar Crimes Division. This is Detective Monroe. We're here about the HOA investigation." I wiped my hands on a rag and nodded toward the porch. "Come on up." They explained that Wendy's actions had triggered a much broader investigation. The forged liens were a federal offense, and since she had used the Postal Service to send fraudulent notices, mail fraud charges were now on the table too. "We're working with the U.S. Attorney's Office," Harris said, pulling out a thick folder. "Your evidence was the catalyst. But we're going to need more testimonies if we want to build an airtight case." I leaned against the porch railing. "You'll get them. People are furious. They just didn't know how deep it went." Monroe nodded. "We've already served search warrants on her house and the HOA office. Found forged documents, dummy bank accounts, and correspondence with a shady law firm that helped her fast-track the liens." The next day, the neighborhood was buzzing again, but this time with purpose. A group of homeowners organized a legal workshop at the newly renamed community center. We brought in a real estate attorney, a former prosecutor, and a forensic accountant to explain what had happened, what rights everyone had, and how to file victim impact statements. I was asked to speak first. Standing at the front of the room, I felt a weight settle on my shoulders. These people had trusted me to help lead the charge, and I wasn't about to let them down. "Wendy counted on us being isolated," I said. "She thought if she came after us one by one, we'd be too scared to fight back. But when we stand together, we're stronger than anything she can throw at us." Applause broke out, and a few people in the back even whistled. The forensic accountant took over, laying out exactly how Wendy had manipulated HOA records. Turns out she had created fake meeting minutes to authorize new special assessments that never actually occurred. Those assessments became the basis for the fraudulent liens. The attorney explained that every homeowner who had been impacted had grounds for a civil suit, and that the HOA itself could be placed into receivership if enough residents petitioned for it. By the end of the night, nearly everyone had signed on to a class action lawsuit. Meanwhile, Wendy sat in county jail, denied bail after prosecutors presented evidence that she had attempted to transfer assets to an offshore account the day after her arrest. At the next interim HOA board meeting, Mr. Ramirez announced that the board had voted unanimously to dissolve the current HOA corporation and establish a new, fully transparent association. Every decision would now require recorded votes and public notices. "This neighborhood belongs to all of us," he said. "Never again will we be ruled by fear and deception." The mood was electric. For the first time since moving in, I felt real pride in the community, but the story wasn't over. 3 weeks later, the Department of Justice filed formal charges against Wendy. Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, and racketeering. She faced up to 30 years in prison. At her initial federal court appearance, she shuffled into the room in an orange jumpsuit, her once meticulously styled hair hanging limp. Gone was the arrogant, self-proclaimed queen of the subdivision. In her place stood a woman who finally understood the gravity of what she had done. I sat in the gallery with a small group of neighbors. When the judge denied her motion for pretrial release, there was a quiet sense of justice settling over the room. Outside the courthouse, a reporter thrust a microphone toward me. "Mr. Vance, how do you feel seeing the former HOA president facing federal charges?" I thought for a second before answering. "I feel like no one is above the law," I said. "And that when good people stand up and refuse to be bullied, even the biggest tyrants fall." The camera lights flickered off, and the reporter nodded respectfully. Back home, life settled into a new rhythm. Without Wendy's interference, small changes popped up everywhere. People repainted their houses in colors they actually liked. Kids set up lemonade stands without fear of being fined. Someone even installed a little free library at the corner of the park. One afternoon, while tuning up the Mustang, I noticed Mr. Ramirez walking up my driveway with a clipboard tucked under his arm. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure, what's up?" He handed me a letter. "The board voted to recognize you with a Community Service Award. First time we're doing something like this." I read the letter. It was simple but heartfelt, signed by every board member and dozens of residents. "We figured you deserved a little more than a handshake and a thanks," he said. I set the letter down carefully on the workbench. "I didn't do it for recognition." "I know. That's what makes it mean something." Later that evening, the neighborhood threw another gathering. This time, it wasn't about ending tyranny. It was about celebrating what we had built together. There were no speeches, no ceremonies, just laughter, music, and the smell of barbecue wafting through the air. As the sun set, Mrs. Patel's granddaughter ran up to me with a plate piled high with cookies. "There for you," she said, beaming. I took one and bit into it, chocolate chip still warm. It hit me then how much had changed. What had started as a fight against one petty tyrant had turned into a movement that reshaped the entire community. And it all started with a hose, a flooded basement, and a refusal to back down. Wendy's trial was scheduled for 6 months later, and the prosecutors were confident. Between the audit, the testimonies, and the physical evidence, her conviction was almost certain, but by then it hardly mattered to us. We had already won. The early days of fall rolled in with a crispness that made the air feel new again. Leaves curled into amber and gold on the sidewalks, and for the first time in a long while, nobody was walking around the neighborhood with their eyes cast down, like they were waiting for the next shoe to drop. Instead, people took their time, chatted across driveways, and waved without hesitation. It felt like the place had finally exhaled after years of holding its breath. One evening, I was putting the finishing touches on a new workbench in the garage when a heavy knock came at the door. I wiped the sawdust from my hands and opened it to find Detective Monroe standing there, a manila envelope tucked under her arm. "Evening, Mr. Vance. Mind if we talk?" I stepped aside and gestured to the living room. She settled into the armchair across from the couch, her expression tight. "We've uncovered something new in the HOA records," she said, sliding the envelope onto the coffee table. "And it's serious." I leaned forward, flipping the envelope open. Inside were photocopies of legal filings, notarized signatures, and a spreadsheet with names that made my stomach twist. "These are foreclosure proceedings," I said slowly, scanning the pages. "But these people never even knew they were at risk." Monroe nodded grimly. Wendy was pushing through fake foreclosure notices on properties where people had minor or non-existent violations. She planned to buy them through a fake holding company and resell at market value once she ran them off. I looked closer at the documents. Some of the names were people I knew: Mrs. Reynolds, the widow who baked pies for every block party, and the Tran family who had just painted their house last summer. Good, decent people who would have lost everything without even understanding why. "You're telling me she was trying to steal homes?" I asked, voice low. "Not just trying." "In 2 cases, she succeeded." The words sat heavy between us. Monroe pulled out a smaller folder. "We're working with state prosecutors now. Real estate fraud on this level carries major time, but the victims need help to reverse the sales. It's complicated when shell companies are involved." I sat back, the weight of it settling into my bones. "What do you need from me?" "We need organization," she said. "Someone the community trusts who can rally these people, get them connected to the legal resources they need." "You've already built that momentum," I nodded once. "I'll do it." Monroe stood, offering her hand. "You're doing more than helping your neighbors, Scott. You're setting a precedent." After she left, I spent the next few hours calling a few people I knew would jump in without hesitation. Mr. Ramirez, Mrs. Patel, the Tran family. By midnight, we had a plan. We called it the Restoration Committee. Our goal was simple: help every wrongfully targeted homeowner reclaim what was theirs and hold anyone complicit accountable. The next Saturday, we held a meeting at the community center. This time, it wasn't just residents, it was lawyers volunteering pro bono hours, real estate experts, even 2 retired judges who lived nearby and wanted to help. Mr. Ramirez opened the meeting, his voice steady. "We're not just cleaning up Wendy's mess. We're making sure nothing like this ever happens again." I took the floor next, laying out the steps each affected homeowner needed to take. Filing fraud reports with the county recorder's office, petitioning to vacate fraudulent foreclosures, and submitting claims for restitution through the criminal court system. Questions flew fast and furious. "How do we prove we never got notice?" Mrs. Reynolds asked, her voice thin. "The burden's on them to prove you did," the volunteer attorney answered. "And with forgery already established, the courts are going to be very skeptical of anything filed under Wendy's regime." "What about the board members who helped her?" Mr. Tran asked. I exchanged a glance with the attorney, who nodded. "They're under investigation too. If they signed off on illegal actions, they'll face charges." By the end of the day, every homeowner who had been targeted was paired with a legal advocate. Paperwork was flying, affidavits were being signed, and for the first time, people had hope. Meanwhile, the federal case against Wendy kept growing. Investigators traced the shell companies back to her cousin in another state, who quickly flipped and provided reams of emails and text messages showing Wendy had orchestrated everything. The final nail came when they seized her personal laptop and uncovered a spreadsheet labeled, chillingly, "Acquisition Targets." It listed properties, projected values after removal, and notes like "easy to intimidate" or "elderly, no family." That discovery changed everything. The U.S. Attorney's Office upgraded the charges to include conspiracy to commit wire fraud and elder abuse, both carrying heavy mandatory sentences. The trial date arrived on a cold, drizzly morning. A group of us carpooled to the federal courthouse downtown. Walking through the metal detectors, I caught sight of Wendy at the defense table, her face hollow, her hands trembling slightly. The courtroom filled quickly. Victims sat in the front rows, their faces set with quiet determination. The prosecutors wasted no time. They painted a damning picture of greed, abuse of power, and calculated exploitation. The evidence was overwhelming. Emails, bank records, testimony from her own cousin. The jury barely looked at her as the prosecution laid out how she had weaponized the HOA to create a personal empire of stolen homes and crushed lives. When it was our turn to give victim impact statements, Mrs. Reynolds stood up first. She was 82, barely 5 feet tall, but her voice carried through the courtroom with a strength that made everyone sit up straighter. "You tried to steal the home I built with my husband," she said, her cane tapping lightly against the floor. "But you couldn't steal our dignity. Not then." "Not now," one by one, others stood. The Tran family spoke about the fear they felt when they received false notices, thinking they might be forced to uproot their children. Mr. Ramirez talked about the betrayal of trust, about how neighborhoods are supposed to be sanctuaries, not hunting grounds for predators. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. "You counted on silence, Wendy. You counted on fear. But you forgot that communities are stronger than bullies." The defense didn't even bother putting Wendy on the stand. Her lawyer knew it was over. After a brief deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on every charge. When the judge pronounced the sentence 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole, Wendy didn't cry. She just sagged in her chair like a puppet with its strings cut. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds broke apart, letting thin bands of sunlight break through. We stood on the courthouse steps, breathing in the clean air. "What happens now?" Mrs. Patel asked quietly. "We rebuild," I said. "For real this time," and we did. The Restoration Committee kept working, helping every homeowner clear their titles and recover damages. The new HOA bylaws passed with overwhelming support, limiting board power, requiring full transparency, and ensuring every decision was democratic. We even started a tradition. Every fall, we held a restoration festival at the park. Music, food, games for the kids. A celebration of what we overcame and a reminder of who we were. One evening, months after the trial, I was back in the garage, polishing the Mustang's chrome bumper, when Mr. Ramirez walked up the driveway with a cooler in hand. "Thought you might like a cold one," he said, popping it open. We sat on the tailgate of my old pickup truck, watching the sun sink behind the houses that now felt truly like home. "You think she ever thought we'd fight back?" he asked after a while. I shook my head. "She never thought we were neighbors, just obstacles." He nodded, taking a long sip. "Funny thing about obstacles, sometimes they push back." The crickets started up as the sky faded into deep blue. Porch lights flickered on one by one, lining the street with soft, welcoming glows. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't wondering when the next notice would show up or who would be targeted next. The fight was over. The neighborhood was ours again, and it would stay that way.